So welcome, Ben. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and talk to me about your business journey and mindset. I'm really happy that you did. Welcome. And can I start by asking you to share a few things about your business and how you actually started it?
So my business it's called Real People Consulting, and I do some leadership consulting, leadership development. I do some executive coaching and leadership coaching, and I do some NLP training and coaching training as well. So primarily I work with businesses across a whole different range of sectors and usually help their leaders be more effective in terms of how they work with their teams. I sometimes work with teams as well and do a bit of team coaching, and that could be part of my work too. So there's a sort of a range of things that I do, but broadly in the development space and sort of coaching space.
Fantastic. And when did you start your business?
Well, so I mean, I have a limited company, and I started that company about 6 years ago. But actually, prior to that, I was still doing the same thing. I was just doing it in a self-employed way and hadn't just formalized that into a limited company. So I've actually been working for myself for 22 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And during that time, was self-employed, had a limited company with someone else for a while still being self-employed. Then that ended, then had another limited company with somebody else for a while as a joint venture. And then we finished that after 10 years and then started my own limited company.
Right. So you've never been in employment?
I have been in employment. I know I look young, but I have actually been in employment. But I was in employment for about 3 years.
Okay. So what was that transition like from being employed and having the certainty to starting your own business?
So for me at the time, it was pretty easy, but that's because I was 24. So to some extent, didn't have too many commitments or worries, perhaps. I also was in the fortunate position where I had been working full time for someone and knew when I went self-employed that they would offer me some work as an associate. So sort of had this guaranteed, semi-guaranteed bit of work that would come in, and then I could build up other options. So for me, it was and for me, honestly, I think I'm almost unemployable because I just don't like working for, I don't like being told what to do. So, for me, being self-employed was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be, in charge of my own destiny, if you like. I wanted to be making my own decisions. And so it was a really straightforward decision to make, actually.
Interesting. Ben, are you coming from entrepreneurial family?
No.
Okay.
No, I come from a family of teachers and healthcare professionals, and almost exclusively. And my dad was a university lecturer. My mum was a nurse and health visitor. My grandfather was a university lecturer. My grandmother was a nurse. My uncle was a university lecturer. My aunt is a teacher. Both aunts were teachers. Yeah, so that's the family. It's teaching and healthcare, actually.
Wow, fantastic! And just looking back, what did they say?
They've always been really supportive. Actually, my parents have been super supportive of those choices that I've made, and so yeah, that was. I mean, I did. So when I was employed for 3 years, and some of that was as a teacher. So I did start out as a teacher,
right?
I trained as a teacher. I'm a qualified teacher. I taught for a while, and then I left that. So yeah, I did start down that route, but then made a few different choices.
Very interesting. So when you decided to go freelancing, was it freelancing?
Yeah, I mean, really, it was freelancing. That's exactly right.
Yep.
Yeah, when I started out, it was really freelancing, whereas I would say now I'm really running a business. But absolutely, when I started, it was freelancing. Yeah.
Very interesting. So when you started then, what was the most challenging aspect of it, perhaps from mindset point of view?
being worried about not having work, I
Mm-hmm.
think, from a freelance perspective. So, you know, recognizing that you only get paid when you're working.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get paid if you're not sick. You don't get paid if you go and do some training. You know, you don't get paid when you're not on holiday. You just get paid when you're working. And therefore, if you're not working, you're not getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, having this thing about looking in my diary and seeing big blank space in there, you know, and I might have work for the next month or two, and then after that there would be blank space.
Mm-hmm.
But sort of always what would tend to happen is that then when I got there would be work in it, you know, work would appear and work would come in. But equally, you know, sometimes there would be big gaps. And I might, when I say big gaps, there might be, you know, a month of very little work or 6 weeks of very little work. And certainly at the beginning, I would get pretty stressed out about that and worried about that. I reckon it took me about 10 years to not worry about that so much. And I guess the reason for that was I found that whenever there were gaps, then there was always work afterwards, and it always appeared again. So I sort of realized, okay, this is always going to be okay. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't really stressful. So I think that was the big mindset shift for me, was not getting stressed about not having work when I didn't. And to some extent as well, when you're a freelancer, you know, you're only as good as your last piece of work. Right. So, you know, there's always, to some extent, there can be a different level of pressure compared to, you know, being employed in a full-time role where, you know, there might be ups and downs, but generally, if it's all good, maybe it's true as a freelancer, but I perceive there to be pressure to do, you know, always do a really good job.
Of course, I can imagine. And having those blank spaces, you know, for some periods of time, did it motivate you to actually, you know, work harder or do a bit more marketing?
I mean, I think in my work, I would say nearly all of my work comes through recommendation, comes through word of mouth, and comes through building relationships with people. Because, you know, really to some extent, people are buying me, you know, in terms of, you know, what I offer. It's not just the knowledge and the skills and the experience that I have, but it's also, you know, me as a person and how I transmit that and how that comes through me, right? So so I've always found that the work I get is always through relationships or through recommendation, actually. And I've hardly ever done any marketing in my life.
Interesting. Okay.
Now, I've done a little bit of what I might call raising my profile, which isn't marketing what I do, but it is making myself more visible. So when I wrote a book and when my book got published, that clearly raised my profile a bit in people's eyes. And I also, you know, have done blog posts and various other things. And the goal of those would just be to raise my profile, but not directly to market to anyone about something, you know. So it's a little bit of a different approach that I've taken, and it has worked for me.
And why is that?
Why have I taken that approach?
Why didn't you actually do some, you know, promotions, say, or, you know, other things around marketing activities?
It's a good question. I mean, partly I can't be bothered.
Okay.
And that's a little bit of an oversimplified answer, probably. You know, what I'm good at is development work and coaching and consulting. You know, I'm not great at marketing. That's not my skill set. And so I've always sort of more thought, well, I'm just going to play to my strengths. And if I do a good job, then people will recommend me, and that will help me get future work. Now, that hasn't always worked out, you know, because unless you get, you know, less people want things and know about you, then you can't get work. So, you know, I would say that hasn't necessarily always worked for me, but I have always not really liked the idea of marketing myself directly. Not because I don't want people to know about me, but just because I find that type of thing not really what I enjoy doing. Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing this. I think it's very valuable insight around, just playing on your strengths and just operating in your zone of genius. Very interesting. And now, Ben, I know you mentioned the book, and I was going to bring that up too. So I'm interested in your book from two perspectives. It's on my list, and I'm going to read this. I'm really looking forward to this. And obviously, having studied with you on the NLP Practitioner qualification, that especially, I know how amazing the resources are that you provide. So with the book, I have two questions. One, on the business side. So it's a passive income source, right? So you mentioned those white spaces or stretches of time without work. So, and passive income is one of the things that can potentially bring in more stable income, right? So that's one of the questions. And second question is if you can tell us a little bit more about a few things about your book.
Okay. Well, so maybe I'll answer the second question first. So
sure,
it was actually one of those periods of time where I didn't have a lot of work. And I did not intend to write a book. That was not something I in the past I thought I would. And 10 years ago, I thought I wanted to write a book. And then I just decided it wasn't really for me and I wasn't going to do it. And I'd completely let go of the idea of ever doing that. And then one day I literally woke up and had an idea. And I've been thinking about, so one of the things for me is I find reading textbooks and manuals, I find them very dry and I find them very hard work. When it comes to coaching, there are some wonderful textbooks and manuals out there. I don't think the world needs any more. And, I certainly didn't want to write another one. But for me, reading those sorts of things, I find it hard to really, take on board everything. And some of the books that have been most impactful for me have been books that have been stories that have taught things along the way. And I remember way back 20 years ago reading Ken Blanchard books where there would be stories that were really easy to read, but they just taught things really simply and it was just really easy to take on board the ideas. So I've always been interested in, how can you help people learn in a way that makes it easy to take on board the learning and makes it memorable. So I had this idea about writing a story that would convey the ideas about coaching. And one day I woke up and had this thought about Alice from Alice in Wonderland. I thought Alice would be a great character to use to teach about coaching. So I just sat down one morning and started writing and, created this fantasy story about Alice and her journey learning about coaching. And I sat down, I did it the first morning, then I sat down again the next morning, I sat down again the next morning. And it was probably about I just did it every day. And I think probably 5 or 6 days had gone. I'd written 20,000 words. And I suddenly thought, maybe this could actually be a book. I mean, maybe this could be something, But actually, but what I did was I just kept writing. I was just enjoying it. I just kept writing. And in fact, I finished the book before I even approached any publishers, which is not common. Most people would get an idea and then approach a publisher. I'd written the whole thing. So I was approaching publishers. They'd say, can you send a sample? I'd say, I can send you the book if you like. And so, they got to see it. So for me, it was all about writing a book that gave people an opportunity to learn about coaching in a different way. There wasn't a manual or a handbook. There was something that still conveyed all the ideas and helped people learn, but it was entertaining and it was funny and it was interesting and engaging. And so that's why I set out to do. Yeah.
And it's really well reviewed at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, people have. I think it's a little bit Marmite, if I'm honest. So people, people who read it, who want to be engaged and stimulated and entertained, love it because that's what it does. And people who just want to get to the, to the information. I mean, I wouldn't recommend they read it. They're better off buying a manual, or a handbook, because that's what those are good for. So, the one or two people who said they weren't so keen on it, we just sort of said, well, I'd just rather read a handbook or a manual. And I would say, great, because that's not what I set out to do. So, the people who read it, who want to enjoy what they're reading have loved it. Yeah.
Fantastic. And on to the second part of the question, then, in terms of creating a passive source of income to support your sort of, just being out there in your business journey?
So I would say to anyone who's thinking about writing a book, as a source of passive income, it's not going to be a big one.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, I was very fortunate actually, because the book was taken by a fantastic publisher, Hodder and Stoughton, or Hachette, a really major publisher. And they gave me a really amazing advance ahead of publication. So, that was actually a really significant sum actually. And then what happened for me is then all the royalties are then earned afterwards, and they sort of pay back that sum. But, in terms of, as a writer, you're probably going to get around 10% of the cover price, I would say. That's certainly my experience anyway. I mean, if you're JK Rowling, then things might be a little bit different. And, I'm writing in a fairly niche area. Coaching is very big, but it's still not, a mass paperback. So, I would say it's never going to be, unless you're writing with huge audiences, it's probably not going to be a vast source of income. It's going to be a nice amount of income. I'm quite fortunate because the book got taken by Korea and translated into Korean. So there was actually another source of income from that as well. So yeah, fantastic. I mean, it's certainly good. I'm pleased to have it. For me, I think, honestly, the major income from the book has been people reading it, and then as a result, wanting me to come and do bits of work for them, wanting me to do training and coaching, wanting me to talk about coaching, wanting me to do leadership work. And actually, that's where the income's been.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Ben. Okay, so my next question is around the niche. So I'm observing with a lot of my coaching clients and colleagues and entrepreneurial friends, they find it really hard to niche down. So for example, coaching can be in pretty much any area, right? So you can be coaching executives, colleagues and employees, entrepreneurs, pretty much anything really. And the idea is you cannot just turn up and say, well, I'm a coach, in anything, right? Because you're not addressing any of the target audiences. So how did you arrive at your niche? And what would be your advice around this? So how do I find out where is my specific niche calling is?
And this is a great question. And I have this conversation with people because I do work with quite a few people who are developing their coaching business, right? And some of them are training and coaching or developing their coaching skills. And one of the things that you, when you're a coach, one of the things that you bring is yourself. We can't not bring ourselves to the coaching. And so there's something there about, who are you going to be good at coaching? Just from your own experiences in life and who you are as a person. I do really think that it's good to have a niche in coaching, or to be clear about who you want to work with, and also to be, and part of that is also being clear about who you don't want to work with as well, and therefore being willing to say, no, actually, I'm not the best person for this. I had an inquiry recently. Someone came to me and said, oh, I'd really like some career coaching. I said, actually, that's not really my speciality. I'm going to put a bit of a call out to my network and see who's out there who might actually be much better suited to work with you, and help this person find the right person. So, because that's not what I want to, and it's also not what I want to do. So part of this is about maybe what I'm good at, but also what I want to do as well. But for me, it was a bit of a journey of doing quite a lot of different bits of coaching to find that out. So I've worked with lots of different people, and after a while began to sort of realize what I liked doing and what I was interested in, and perhaps also what I was good at as well. So, I work a lot with leaders who are wanting to sort of progress to the next level. So, often they might be leaders who are just taking on a more senior role or moving up to exec level. And that seems to be an area where I'm able to work really effectively. I also do some personal coaching with people, and you know, a lot of that's based on my previous NLP life as well, of doing a lot of NLP coaching. So I do some of that too.
Fantastic. That actually reminded me, you mentioned that you've done a lot of leadership coaching. How did you land your first ever paying client, and how did that feel? If you remember.
I'm not sure I can remember. I mean, it was probably 20 years ago. So I'm not sure. I mean, I can't really remember. I can remember some early clients that I worked with. And you know, honestly, when I first started coaching, I'd be quite anxious because, you know, I hadn't done loads of it, and I was still in that space of, you know, am I doing the right thing? And oh, you know, what if I don't help them get the right result? And what if it, you know, what if it doesn't go well? So I would say, you know, honestly, quite early on, I would often be a bit anxious when I was getting coaching clients. And it took a while for me to build up the skill and experience and to be able to just, you know, feel completely comfortable.
And just leading on to the next one, how did you feel about, or how do you feel about it now, having pricing conversations and sharing your pricing, especially perhaps if you're offering a premium service and pricing can seem, you know, quite high?
Well, I think one of the lessons for me was it's not really about price, it's about value. So really it's a, you know, so of course there's a price and there's a number there, but really what we're talking about is what's the value someone's going to get from that. And you know, my approach to it actually is to have the conversation early. So these days I tend to, like, really early on say to people, you know, this is what I charge, and you know, if that's not for them, that's okay. It really is. You know, I'm really not in the business of convincing anyone to buy anything they don't feel comfortable buying. So you know, I'm gonna be really clear about what my pricing is. I do want them to be able to understand the value they might get from that, because I think that's important. But you know, then it really is up to them whether that is something that they want to engage in.
Did you ever have to turn clients away because you're so fully booked?
Yeah.
How did that feel?
One of the hangovers from being a freelancer. So one of the things of when I mentioned being a freelancer, one of the things about being a freelancer was never saying no to work. Yeah, because it, like, there were always going to be these gaps further on. So, you know, I can remember, like, even though I've worked 10 days in a row, someone phones me up and says, can you do some extra work? I'm going to say yes, because I never know when these gaps or when the work might run out. So there was a kind of hangover from that from me of being really reluctant to say no to things and to turn work down, actually. But you know, and it really is only in more recent times, and what I mean by recent is, you know, 2 or 3 years probably, when I have been much more discerning about what I want to do, and also, you know, how much I'm willing to be paid for that as well. So, you know, I might occasionally turn things down because simply that, you know, the fee that's being offered or what a client can pay just doesn't fit. And sometimes it's just because I just don't fancy doing that kind of work, you know, and they're asking for something that I just don't want to do, you know, and I'll just be upfront with them about that and say, you know, that's not something I can help with.
Fantastic. Ben, what's the future is like for you and for your business? Do you have long-term plans?
No.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that's quite a deliberate choice. And the reason for that is that, you know, so I used to do lots of long-term planning. And you know, absolutely, there are times when it's really good to set goals and have things to aim towards. So like that can be really worthwhile. But I used to do a lot of long-term planning. And then, you know, often I'd get sort of halfway there and think, you know what, that's not really what I want to do anyway, you know. And so, you know, I could find myself working towards something, and actually it would turn out that's not really what I wanted to do. Maybe I'm just really poor at knowing what I want in the future. You know, that might be it. But for me, what I've discovered is when I don't sort of set big plans or goals, and just sort of take it a bit more as it comes, really good things happen. So, like I said, I never intended to write a book. Suddenly I had the idea, and so I sat down and wrote one, and it's been amazing and super well received. So, you know, I deliberately don't do that. I guess I have like a sort of intention, maybe, if we were going to use that sort of language around, you know, I do know the kind of things that I want to be doing, but, you know, I try and let go a little bit of what that might look like, and instead just sort of, well, let's see. I suppose in some ways I'm a bit more adaptive and a bit more, you know, because who knows what the market is going to do, and who knows what people are going to want. And, you know, there's so many things in the world right now that are changing externally that affect all sorts of things. You know, I tend to be a little bit more just keeping an eye on the horizon, I suppose, and seeing what's happening, and then, you know, being willing to adapt, and, you know, maybe my work takes a slightly different turn, or there's a different need.
Thank you very much for sharing this. This is really interesting. And I loved how that idea of trust actually appeared in a few places in our conversation. Thank you. So my final question then is, based on your own business journey and lessons you've learned along the way, what would be a recommendation for someone just about to start or starting their own business?
Well, I suppose, you know, all my business has been, you know, in service areas, right? So I've never been really in product. I've been in service, and, you know, that's coaching, that's consulting, that's training. I'm pretty pragmatic in some ways. So I sort of think, you know, it's about getting on and doing it. And like the best advert you can have is to do it, and then people will talk about it. I see people spend ages thinking about what to call their business, and ages thinking about the logo, and ages thinking about the branding. You know, a friend and I started a business, and we said, we've got to call this something. It was an NLP business. We've got to call this something. And I said to him, look, I don't really care what the business gets called. Tesco's doesn't mean anything. Asda doesn't mean anything. But we know exactly what their brand is, and we know exactly what they are. But the word itself means nothing, you know. So I said, it doesn't really matter what the word is, because people will, or the name is, people will associate stuff with it. And so we were literally sat at his kitchen table, and I started looking around the room, and I said, okay, what if we call it chair? Or what if we call it fireplace? Or what if we call it carpet? Or what if we call it sugar? And he was like, oh, sugar NLP. I quite like that. And I was literally looking at the sugar bowl, and we said, right, sugar NLP, that's what we'll call it. Great, done. It took us about 5 minutes.
Fantastic.
And you know, that actually was a super successful name. We sort of, as a result of it, we came up with this strapline of sweeten your life. But like, it came out of thinking about this. You know, one of my really good friends started a business, a super niche business, making a board which would attach to your bike that you could put a map on. So it was for people that were doing very niche cycling events where they needed a map on their handlebars that they could view. And he called this device, this thing that he sold, a map deck. And for a few years, he sold these plastic boards. Like, I'm sure didn't make loads and loads of money, but it was a successful product. And then he developed this business, and he now has, you know, locally where I live in the Lake District, he now has probably the premier indoor cycling training venue with, you know, the latest high-tech stuff. He has a shop, he has a full bike mechanic area, and they do loads of bike mechanic stuff, but he still calls it Map Deck. because that's what his first product was. And everybody knows, they say, I'm going down to Map Deck to the, to the gym. And half the people don't know why it's called that. They don't know that he originally started making these plastic boards, but it doesn't matter because he's, it's associated with the name. So sort of, one of my lessons is to spend, to not get so caught up in what things need to be called and how it needs to be looked, at least at the start, right? And then, and spend a bit more time actually getting on with it. And you can always change some of that stuff afterwards. I mean, the name that can't be changed probably, but the branding and all that sort of stuff can be done afterwards. So, I guess I'm a bit more, get on with it and do the work and think about that stuff when the time's right.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ben. It was really interesting conversation, and I've learned so much about your business and so many inspiring lessons too. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Rushana. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.